بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا نور يا نور يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا، ولا لقبائحي ساترا، ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. ظلمت نفسي، ظلمت نفسي، ظلمت وتجرأت بجهلي، وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي، كم من قبيح سترته، وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته، وكم من عثار وقيته، وكم من مكروه دفعته، وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي، وأفرط بي سوء حالي، وقصرت بي أعمالي، وقعدت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي، وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها، ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي، فأسألك بعزتك لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي، ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي، وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي، من لي غيرك؟ أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي، أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا، مستغفرا منيبا، مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري، غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري، وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مضعنا ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين، أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته، وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي، فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما آملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته وإحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة، وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي، قو على خدمتك جوارحي، واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك، وعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني عثرتي، واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء، وذكره شفاء، وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء، وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابغ النعام، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله. وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So continuing with our discussion on Ijtihad and Taqlid, I want to give a quick summary of what we've gotten so far. Not a summary of the whole thing, but just the evolution of this term and the usage of this term. I know we've gone through it in the past 2 sessions already, and but I just want to add one more little detail, and that I did hint at last week, but I feel that it's necessary to actually explain it a little bit, or at least elaborate. So Shahid Baqir al-Sadr, he says that this evolution of the term has taken place, correct? And so we made it seem like it's 2 stages. One pre-muhaqqiq hilli, and then one post-muhaqqiq hilli, 2 usages. But in reality, he says there's 3 usages, okay? So I want to explain that a little bit before we move on. And by the way, muhaqqiq hilli should not be mistaken with allama hilli. Someone was asking me about that. Muhaqqiq hilli is the maternal uncle of the great Allama Hilli. Yeah, so the school of Hilla, they has a lot of great scholars. Ibn Tawus and others, also his relatives, they're all from that school. And they kind of, I would say, are a turning point in Islamic scholarship as well. They represent kind of a turning point in some fields of study. I don't want to get into that right now. Anyway, Shahid Baqir al-Sadr, he says, look, there was a time where Ijtihad was just bad, until Muhaqqiq Hilli. Muhaqqiq Hilli, what he did was, he said, look, we have Ijtihad too. The Shia have Ijtihad as well. And their Ijtihad though, and this is the part Sadr says, he says their Ijtihad is when they don't find a hadith for something. This is important, okay? When they don't find a hadith for something, that's when they have to actually start thinking a little bit, working harder, putting an effort in to come up with the ruling. Or else, if you have a hadith on something, there's no effort there. The hadith is talking to you, is telling you the rule. No effort, no ijtihad, no juhud, no effort. So Shaykh Sadr points this out. He says it seems that Hilli doesn't consider ijtihad to apply to cases where you have a hadith, okay? Because there's no hardship there, there's no effort there that needs to be made. Then, that's stage 2, he says, Shaykh Sadr. So stage 1, ijtihad is used only for bad. Stage 2, and that's during the time of the Imams onward till Muhaqqiq Hilli. Muhaqqiq Hilli, he says, no, we have good ijtihad. That's when you don't have a hadith for something, and you have to make an effort to figure it out based on whatever clues that you can use. Shaykh Sadr says, all right, that is the 2nd stage, but the 3rd stage now, it expands more, the usage of this term expands more to the point that even if you have a hadith for something, very clear hadith for something, still you are doing ijtihad, okay? You are still doing ijtihad. Why? Why? Because true, the hadith is clear. But question, my understanding from this hadith, the apparent meaning of this hadith, the apparent meaning of this hadith that I got, who says that my understanding is binding? Huh? The zahir meaning of this hadith, who says it's binding? Do you have 100% certainty that this is what the Imam meant? No. All I can say is that it's the apparent meaning of what the Imam said. So how's that binding on me? Let's say you have a hadith for this, and we'll talk about this more when we go through the requirements of ijtihad and conditions of ijtihad. Okay? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. That's the bulk of today's actually session. Who says that's binding on me? Have I been able to, first of all, identify the apparent meaning? That itself requires work. Who says once I identify the apparent meaning, what apparently the Imam was saying, that's going to be binding on me? And things like that. Alright? So he says, even there, you have to have done work beforehand. Come up with a rule, okay, that you can apply to every single hadith you come across. So who says if you have a hadith there's no ijtihad? No, even there's ijtihad. So he says it reaches a point post Muhaqqiq Hilli. So you see Muhaqqiq Hilli is in between still. He says there's the ijtihad, and we also have cases where you don't have ijtihad. After that, he says, Shaykh Sadr says, it goes on and evolves more and more the usage of this term to the point where what you have is anything that you do to derive Islamic law. Yes, as I said, even if you crack open a book of hadith, that itself, that is going to be called ijtihad as well. So ijtihad becomes synonymous with istinbat, which means derivation, to derive Islamic law. All right, so those are three, I would say, stages. Yes.
This third interpretation that Shaykh Sadr is I guess, indicating, is he the first one who kind of express it that way?
Very good question. So is Shaykh Sadr the one who is the pioneer of this third usage? No, he's just saying that look, it over time it evolved into that. Yeah, he's just here he's playing the role of a historian, letting us know that look, this term after Muhaqqiq Hilli, it started evolving more and more the usage of it to the point where nowadays this is what it is. It is synonymous to istinbat. Okay, very good observation. So now this ijtihad that we went through the history of its usage and all of that for the very important purpose of understanding that if the Imam say it's haram, what they mean by ijtihad is that specific ra'i or qiyas or istihsan and these things that only bring you dhan and conjecture. Okay? Once we figure that out, so what is this ijtihad all about now? Okay? Now, as we go forward in future sessions and all of that, we will go deeper into each of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight we're going to just scratch the surface here to get an idea, just get a complete overview of how this ijtihad works. So if I want to be a mujtahid, what do I have to have? What are those skills that I have to have achieved and gained through study and through whatever else it is, and discussion and discourse, that will allow me to do ijtihad, that will allow me to derive Islamic law from its sources? Now, once again, there are classical scholars who have said some things about what those conditions are. Some maybe give you a list of 10 to 15 maybe requirements, okay? I'll go through some of those. This is from, some of these that I'll mention are from Sahibul Ma'alim. There's a book called Ma'alim al-Usul. The son of Al-Shahid al-Thani has written this. Shahid Thani, we'll get to him inshallah sometime in the future. Shahid Thani is one of those, which means second Shahid. He is one of those names that we have to remember if we want to have any idea of how Islamic fiqh and Shi'i fiqh has developed. So he has a son. He has a book called Ma'alim al-Usul. Over there, and I think they're in the, if I'm not mistaken, 10th, 11th century-ish, something like that, after Hijrah. So they're classical scholars, but they're not of the Qudama, they call them. Anyway, he's talking about, he gives us like 7, 8, 9 conditions. Number 1, he says being familiar with the Arabic language, whether it's vocabulary, whether it's morphology, sarf, whether it's nahu, grammar, you have to have a very strong grasp of that. He says knowing the ayatul ahkam. We have about 500 something verses, or close to 500 verses, I don't know the exact number, of ayat and verses in the Quran that are only about fiqh and ahkam, rulings. Men do this, women do that. Children, when they want to enter the home, the room, they have to do this. This, eating this is halal, drinking this is haram, and so on and so forth. 500, around 500 verses. He says you have to be aware of these verses. Now I'm going to go through this list and then we'll come back and critique some of them, inshallah. He says knowing the hadiths of the ma'sumin, yeah, and having that ability to refer to them, find them in the books. Makes sense, doesn't it? So I want to say this. If a person says, we don't need ijtihad, we don't need maraji' taqlid, for example, I'll go to the hadith books myself. All right, bismillah, how good do you know them? Oh, I'll just ask a normal scholar. Well, then that person's becoming, you're doing taqlid of that person actually. This is very important to keep in mind. As we go through this class, I'll keep pointing this out, because people say, oh, we'll understand the hadith itself. So-and-so, what's the meaning of this? What's going on here? Well, then you're doing taqlid in that particular part of the hadith that you're asking about. If you're a mujtahid, you don't have to ask. At best, you'll refer to a dictionary when you need the meaning of a word, for example, things like that. But anyway, the next one, he says the science of rijal and these biographies of the transmitters of hadith, to be able to have a grasp of that, to know of the different ijma'as that are out there. Ijma' means consensus, but it has a technical usage. We'll get to that inshallah sometime in the future as well. So he says, knowing about these ijma'at, these different ijma'as that ulama have had throughout history on certain rulings and certain matters. Can I go against ijma'? If they tell you all of the scholars, they say from Kulayni to Khomeini, from the beginning to the end, have a certain verdict on something, are you going to go against it? No? It requires some audacity to go against an ijma'. Okay, so we'll have to talk about that. So to be able to understand, you have to know where the ijma'at are to see if you're going to go against it or not. He says also knowing the science of usulul fiqh. Now some will call it Islamic legal theory. Okay, but it's those rules, those general rules that you can use to derive law. And I will explain in detail. I'll give you lots of examples inshallah once we get there regarding this usul al-fiqh, because this one is vital, very, very important. He says, knowing logic, the science of logic, to the amount that, or to the extent that you can argue, make arguments, okay? And a few other ones that he talks about. Some have even added this one, brothers and sisters. Some have added al-quwwa al-qudsiyya, to have a purity, okay, of the nafs, so that you can, so Allah can maybe guide you to the truth, okay? This is not just any other secular science at the end of the day. This is the rules of Allah, rules of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Alright, so if I want to get closer to the truth, well, the ultimate truth is Allah, and haqq and purity gets me there. So if I want to learn Allah's rule, I have to try to be closer to Allah. And so you'll find this sometimes, it's pointed out. Now here it says that Al-Wahid Al-Bahbahani is the one who talks about this. And I did check his book, Al-Fawaid Al-Ha'iriyya, and over there he does go into a lot of detail regarding this one, the piety and purity. It's a condition. But having said all of that, let's go back now. I'm going to go through these very quickly again to just show that not all of these actually seem to be conditions for being able to derive Islamic law. Not necessarily. Okay? The first one, Arabic, we'll talk about that one later. It seems like that is definitely one of the conditions. Next one, Ayatul Ahkam. To know the verses, what does that mean? Does that mean that I have to have memorized all of the verses that are about Ahkam? No. Even if I can find them in a book, that should be enough. And if I do find them in a book, that doesn't, knowing these or knowing how to use these verses doesn't help me necessarily derive Islamic law, generally speaking. No, it's good to know these. But these are the raw information that I use, that I do ijtihad on to derive law from. Right? They're not the tool for deriving law. What are they? They are what I derive law from. Ayatul Ahkam, verses of the Quran that have ahkam in them, are what we go to. The raw, it's like saying a carpenter can only be a carpenter if there's wood. No, no, no. Even if there's no wood, a carpenter can still be a carpenter. They just might not actualize that potential they have in them because they have nothing to work with of raw material. So one of those raw materials is ayatul ahkam for a mujtahid. If a verse comes up that has to do with ahkam, he does ijtihad on those. So those are not enabling a person to do ijtihad, but rather they are the material one does ijtihad on. Okay? So this one should go to the side actually. Next one, knowing the hadiths of the ma'sumin. Same thing again. Knowing them, what do you mean by knowing them? If I know how to approach them with usulul fiqh, Islamic legal theory, the rules that I have, then I'm a mujtahid. But to know these, what does it mean to know them? These are the raw material once again that we use. So no, it doesn't seem like this one also falls into that category. Ilmul rijal. This one seems to be an important one. We'll get to this one later as well. Knowing about the different ijma'at. Once again, raw material that we use not a tool that we use for our ijtihad. So no, ijma'at, once again, no, it doesn't fall in that category of requirements. Usulul fiqh, yes. And so there's actually 3 or 4 that we actually need, that I want to talk about tonight. Okay? And Ayatollah al-Khu'i, he's the one who talks about these. Where does he talk about these? He talks about these in a couple of his Usul al-Fiqh books. Well, one of them is Usul al-Fiqh. Another one is one of his fiqh books. It's called At-Tanqih. Now this is one of his main works, At-Tanqih, which is really the transcription of all of his fiqh lessons over the decades that he gave in Najaf, okay? Tanqih, these are transcriptions from different students of his. They've transcribed his darses, his dars kharijes, and so it's become this book. Nowadays, in the seminaries, no one can give a dars kharij without taking a look at this book to see what the opinion of Ayatollah Khu'i is on a matter. And it's not even about opinion. It's just his approach to the whole mas'ala. How does he break it down? Where does he enter? Where does he exit? Okay? And so usually they will design their arguments to an extent based on the way his arguments are designed. They might agree with him on some parts, disagree, but all in all, it just looks like his. Lots of times that's the case, but there will be some who will have their own styles. All I'm trying to say is that this is a very important book. Anyway, in the first volume of it, right in the beginning, he's talking about ijtihad before he gets into all of fiqh. Okay? He says, let's see if this is even permissible what we're doing before we get into it. So over there, he's talking about the different conditions of being a mujtahid. Once he explains that it is permissible, it is wajib, all that kind of stuff, then he talks about the conditions. What does he say? He says, number 1, the Arabic language, of course. Okay, there's no doubt, because the raw material that we're going to, in order to understand it, we have to understand the Arabic language. Not just the Arabic vocabulary, but of course the grammar, the sarf, the nahu, all these things. To know the different Arabic, just like any other language, you'll have words on their own, that's morphology. How do I make this brick? How do I make this brick? These are different units that will come together to make a wall. When I put them together in a sentence, that's where nahu comes in. These bricks come together. How do I place these bricks together now to make a wall, to make a sentence? To be able to break it down, brothers and sisters, you have to have sarf and nahu. What is this word? Is it a verb? Is it a noun? What is it? What's it doing in this sentence? That's where grammar and nahu comes in. So sarf, nahu, these two come together and you have a good grasp of the Arabic language. Yes? Right now in the seminaries, at least when we were growing up, 3 years you spend just on these. Just on these, to the point that when we were bicycling to the shrine of Bibi Ma'suma, alayha salam, we would, me and my friend, I've told some of you this, we would practice sarf as we would go, right? As we would bike to the haram. 15, 20-minute bike ride, maybe a 15-minute bike ride. They were just going through these verbs so that we can conjugate them accurately, so that later on when you see it in a book, when you're reading, you don't have to sit there and think. You read, man, you read. Okay? And some people, they figured things out and they know how important Arabic language is. They are lecturers. They haven't gone to the seminaries, but they've worked on their Arabic to the point where they might know as much as a seminarian will know. And so they will pass as a seminarian. It's very interesting. They've understood that Arabic is that important. Even if you don't go to Hawza, if you want to speak about Islam, if you have a good grasp of the Arabic language, you can probably pull it off. Okay? So without a doubt, Arabic language, you have to be able to go through the text very quickly. Now, as you're going, your mind is working hard, like it's second nature. You're identifying every word as you go, but then boom, you'll hit a word that you don't know. Okay, that's where you have to look it up in the dictionary. Vocabulary takes some time to pick up, but in fiqh, in the ahadith and all of that, you slowly get the hang of the language of the imams and the words that they would use. Okay. All right, so now, Arabic language, Arabic grammar. But then he does point one thing out, Ayatollah Khu'i, and I like this. He keeps it simple and straightforward. He says, look, some have said, ilmul ma'ani, ilmul bayan, ilmul badi', all these things that give eloquence to Arabic. We have to learn all of these sciences as well. He says, no. You don't have to learn all of these. Even in the classical scholars, some have said that if you want to learn these, you can, but they're not necessary. He straight up says, Only the amount of Arabic that is needed to understand the text. When you go to the hadiths, brothers and sisters, you won't find eloquence the way that you will have to, in such that you will have to have learned these sciences so that you can understand what the Imams are saying. The Imams were usually speaking just normal conversations. Yes, I will say one thing. The Imams are very particular about the words they use. So the maraji', for example, the ulama, the mujtahideen, what they're doing when they're discussing the hadiths of the Imams, they'll say, why did he use this word instead of that word? He could have used this word. Is there something going on here? Let's try to figure it out. Even the way the sentence is, how sometimes the predicate comes first and then the subject comes. And sometimes the subject comes first, then the predicate comes. Even putting these back and forth sometimes will have an effect. These are simple though. These are simple things that you will get the hang of very easily. It's not like it's super eloquent now to the point where if I don't have all of those sciences down, then I won't understand these hadiths. No, lots of times it's normal. It's just normal dialogues that they're having with people who are asking them questions. Okay? But there is no doubt that the du'as of the Imams, there's a lot of eloquence there. That this particular ahadith that have to do with deeper tawheed maybe, or imama and the core of imama, those might have more to them, yeah. But usually when it comes to fiqh, usually I'm going to say 90% of the time, that number I'm just throwing out there, yeah, you're not gonna have to worry too much about the eloquence factor. And if there is a hadith that does have something like that in it, you can be sure lots of scholars before you have discussed it and done the work already. All right, and so you won't have too much of a hard time. All right, so he says those things that have la dakhalata lahu fil fiqh, that don't have much to do with the fiqhi aspect of it, you don't have to worry about it when it comes to Arabic language. All right, what else? He goes on, he says no need for logic. So you're trying to tell us that we have to be illogical now? No. He says, look, logic with a capital L, let's say, okay? You don't have to know that logic, where you have all the terms down, you know, this Aristotelian logic, mantiq, suri we talked about before. What the premises are, what the sughra, the kubra, natija, these things. He says, don't worry about these things. When we say logic, we're just talking about the normal logic with a lowercase l of people. The logic that allows you to understand that this argument that I'll just give you, for example, is an erroneous one. If I tell you, this is a pencil, some pencils are red, so this pencil is red. Will you agree with me on this? Why? Because the second premise was not an all-encompassing general one that says all pencils are red. It said some pencils. So you say, look, a chain is as strong as its weakest link. Here, we had some pens are red, or pencils are red. You can't now say that for sure that because this is a pencil, it's going to be red now. No. If you say this is a pencil, all pencils are red, then you can conclude this pencil is going to be red. But this is, you don't have to have gone to like some seminary to understand. This is normal basic logic. That much logic you have to have, okay? And that is for everybody, already has that, he says, kind of. You have to worry about all those other technical terms and the science of logic. So don't worry about that. And he brings a good example. He says, do we know of any of the companions of the Imams who knew Aristotelian logic? These transmitters of hadiths, these ones that the Imams would refer others to, did they have logic? Did they know logic with a capital L? No. All right, so that one's that one. But then we have two more left. Usul al-fiqh, that I said we'll talk about later, which is now, and rijal. These two are very important. Okay? Very, very important. Usul al-fiqh. He says, look, because Islamic rulings are not axiomatic, they're not self-evident. Okay? They're not like, you know, I think therefore I am type of thing. No, if you want to believe and adopt and accept an Islamic ruling, it's not going to be something that you were born with and you just know. You have to bring evidence for it. Prove it to yourself at least with convincing evidence. And so because of that, just like any other science, yeah, you will have to discuss each of those rules that you're going to be believing in, adopting and embracing when it comes to approaching the sources. All of these propositions, you have to have enough convincing argument for yourself at least, and evidence for yourself. The moment you say evidence, that means it's a science. Okay? And those different theories that have to do with that subject, okay, are going to be discussed somewhere. Where are they discussed when it comes to fiqh? They are discussed in usul al-fiqh. And we all know now. We have fiqh, we have usul al-fiqh. We all know the difference between these two. Usul means those asls, those general rules that we can use to derive fiqh, to do fiqh. Okay? Alright. Usul, just like you want to learn about the natural world. I want to learn about, the motion of things and how, well, that's where physics comes in, let's say. I want to learn about the makeup of certain organisms. Okay, biology will come in. That's where we discuss it. I want to talk about different things when it comes to the sources, how I approach them. Well, that's something we call it usul al-fiqh. You want to call it something else, but usually it's called usul al-fiqh. I want to give you now examples of what is discussed in this science, so we can get an understanding of, oh, there's more to it than we thought. Mr. I can do my own ijtihad, right? Okay? No, it's more complicated. It reaches a point where you're just like, man, just let someone else do it. Okay? Things that that never crossed our minds, okay, have crossed the minds of these great ulama over the ages. Now someone might say, why complicate things? Baba, it's the akhirah we're talking about here. We are after Islamic law. It's no kidding, it's no joke. Yes, Shaykh al-Mufid might have a fatwa on something, but what if I have a few questions regarding his fatwa as a mujtahid? Can I just say, oh, well, Shaykh al-Mufid is one of the founding fathers of Shi'ism. I'll just go back with him. Well, what if you have 10 questions that he hasn't answered? And who in their right mind, for example, I know this is not a perfect example, but I'm going to give it anyway. Who in their right mind will say, yeah, 100 years ago, this is how they would treat this illness, so let's just go with that. No, what if I have 10 questions regarding that treatment now? Does it just not make sense? Is it just not logical that I will go and revisit the evidence? I will go and revisit what that physician had done 100 years ago and see if I can add to that? Same thing. So, having said all of that, there's different ways to discuss usul al-fiqh. Different books have been written. I'm going to share with you what one of these ulama does in his book. He is one of the greatest of all time, and in the past 100, 150 years, I don't remember exactly, Shaykh al-Ansari. Is it more than 150 years? More than 150 years maybe. It's like 200 years, 300 years, I don't know how much. 200 maybe-ish. Shaykh al-Ansari, okay, his books till today are the main books studied in the Hawza. Okay, I would say in the intermediate stage of the Hawza. Okay, once you're in your 7th, 8th, 9th year, you're studying his books. Rasail. Okay, which is really, it's Fara'id al-Usul, but they call it Rasail. Alright, in there, this is how he does it. 3 years, brothers and sisters, you're studying this book of Usul al-Fiqh. How does he do it? What's the breakdown? He says, look, when it comes to Islamic law, you either have 100% certainty that a law is a certain law. Let's just say somebody has a dream and becomes 100% sure that this is the ruling for this matter. Okay? Can I hold them responsible? They're 100% sure. I can try to get rid of that certainty, but when the certainty is there, it's there. Alright, so is this certainty binding? Especially since some people's certainty is wrong. They're not ma'soom at the end of the day. They discuss this in usul al-fiqh. Certainty, how binding is it? What if someone has a maraz and just becomes certain so quickly, easily? They say even with the jumping of a crow, they're like, oh my God, they become certain about something. Okay? Well, paridane kalog, they say in Farsi. Okay? These are all discussed there. This is something you wouldn't even think about. Who says certainty is binding? Let's talk about it. Well, why would you even say certainty is not binding? Because we're not ma'soom. What if we're mistaken in our certainty? So they talk about this. The person who has a maraz, qat'ul qatta', the one who has a lot of qat', a lot of yaqeen, a lot of certainty for no reason. What about them? Is it binding on them? Is it not? All of these are discussed there. He says, 1, you have certainty in a ruling. A lot of discussions will come. I'm just giving you some examples. Or no, you don't have certainty, but you have dhann. You have 50%, 60%, 70%. Let me not say 50, 60, 70, 80% certainty. This is called dhann. Now, he'll ask you the question, and this is where the main discussions come, brothers and sisters. Because usually we don't have yaqeen on rulings. We have dhann. This dhann sometimes will stem from something like qiyas, istihsan, ra'i, batil ijtihad. If you're pre-muhaqqiq hilli times, they discuss these. But then they'll say there are some dhans, some dhunun, that's the plural for it, that are hujjah, are binding on you. Or are they can be binding on you. Let's discuss those. So then they'll go into all of the different discussions there. Let me give you some examples, okay? They say, look, usually where are we getting our dhan from? We're getting our dhan from the hadiths that we have. Okay? Question. The hadith that you have, do you have yaqeen that the Imam actually verbalized these words? Uttered these words and statements, or no? You're 70-80% sure because maybe they made a mistake in the transmission. You say, I have 80% certainty. They say, okay, that's a dhan. We have to talk about it. Why should you listen to this dhan? Who said you can take a hadith when you're only 80% sure? But I know because they're the most trustworthy. The whole chain of narrators is trustworthy people. Don't they make mistakes? Reliable chain doesn't mean ma'soom chain. So how do you know? He's saying that the Imam uttered these words. What if he made a mistake? What if he's lying? No, but they're reliable people. Still, reliable people don't sin. This is called, the hadith is dhanniyus sudur. Has this hadith actually been uttered? It's dhanni. We're not sure. 80% sure, 70%. But what does the Quran tell us? If you have a dhan in something, it's not going to be enough. Inna dhanna la yughni min al-haqqi shay'a. Alright? If you have a dhan in something, that's not yaqeen, it's not worth anything. So how can I have to discuss now and prove that the Imams have said it's okay. This 80% certainty, this 70% certainty, we're okay with it. Take it. Act as if it's 100% certainty. And so then it becomes a dhan mu'tabar. Okay? A dhan that is mu'tabar, is credible. You can take it as yaqeen. You see? That's discussed there. Alright, I am 100% sure that the Imams are okay with me following my 80% conjecture on this hadith. But now that I'm okay to follow it, what is the hadith actually saying? Am I 100% sure the Imam meant this? Or am I 80% sure, 90% sure the Imam meant this? All of a sudden, you're sure about the sudur. Sudur literally means issuance. That this hadith has been issued. I'm sure the Imams are okay with me saying that this has been issued. What is it? What is meant by it? I'm not 100% sure. That's when another discussion comes now. Pages upon pages of discussion. Why is it okay for you to follow 80% conjecture? 80% certainty regarding what is meant by the words. This is where the discussion of dhahir comes in. The dhahir of this, the apparent meaning. Why is the apparent meaning of a statement binding on me? So, I wasn't sure if the Imam uttered it. The Imams or fiqh or usul al-fiqh took care of that. I wasn't sure what the Imams meant by it 100%. I was 80%, 90% sure. The Imam said, that's fine. Okay, go with that as well. Now, I'm saying the Imams said, usul al-fiqh, which is based on what the Imams say and other things. But it then has to go back to the Imams in one way or another. We'll talk about these things later, inshallah. There are some ulama that have said in the past, khabar wahid you can't even act upon. I don't care if you have 80% certainty in this being issued. I don't care if you're 80% sure what the Imam meant by what was said. I, in totality, disagree with the fact that we can follow khabar wahid, solitary reports. I'm not okay with that. These are all discussed in usul al-fiqh. What do we do when two reliable reports contradict each other? Because man, brothers and sisters, I hate to break it to you, but at least half, if not more, of the 4 main hadith books that we have, in the introductions, the author of that book is saying, I wrote this book for one purpose. And I wrote it for the purpose, or for the main purpose of the fact that the people are calling us out and finding fault in us, the Shia, because they say you have so many conflicting reports. What are you going to do about that? Mr. I can do my own ijtihad. Trust me, it's not worth it, man. Just let others do it. It's very complicated. Ta'arud al-adillah. Some people say that the main job of usul al-fiqh is to tell us how to do ta'adul and tarajih, to be able to reconcile or to be able to prefer one report over the other when both of them are reliable. Because if one is not reliable, you just put that aside, you go with the reliable one. No, when you have two reliable hadiths going against each other, what are you going to do? What if there's a reliable report? I look at, like, let's say, the chain of narrators. It is a beautiful chain of narrators. But I find that throughout history, none of the ulama have relied on it and given a fatwa based on it. Doesn't that scare you a little bit? You see, we look at it mathematically. No, it's detective work. Ijtihad is detective work. Because if it was math, you just say, okay, the chain of narrative is good. Who cares about 1,200 years of scholarship? I don't care. Let all of them go against this hadith. I'm going to go with this hadith. No, you get scared. You're like, what if there was something wrong with this that hasn't reached me? Usul al-fiqh discusses these things. And vice versa. There's a weak hadith, but then you find 75% of the ulama throughout history have acted upon it and given a fatwa based on it. Like, there must have been some strength in it that hasn't reached me. So these things pull you and tug and pull and push, and you're just like trying to figure it out. Is detective work. All of this stuff is discussed in usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh talks about hadith and all of these conjectures, all of these dhunun that we have, which ones are mu'tabar, we can rely on, which ones we cannot. Then we have the Quran. The Quran, can I rely on the Quran? Someone will say, what in the world are you saying? Can I rely on the Quran? Of course you can. Then some akhbaris will come and say, well, what about the hadiths that say only those who were addressed by the Quran understand its meaning Ahlul Bayt. Yeah? Only the ones understand it who are man khutiba bih. The ones who are addressed by the Quran was sent to, will understand it. What do you do about those hadiths? And yet there are some who will not go to the Quran for their ijtihad. I don't know if you heard of that before. So the only thing we have with the Quran, alhamdulillah, is that we don't have to say, oh, what's the chain of narrators of this? Although there's also discussions there, because the Quran that has reached us, there are different qira'at of it. All of a sudden you have a problem there. What do I do? For example, there's a ruling for the women. It says hatta yathurna, but some of the qira'at say hatta yattaharna. And the rule that you draw from this will differ crazily if you read it yattaharna versus yathurna. Yathurna means if they become pak. Yattaharna means they also do ghusl after. Which one is it? Or for example, it says innama al-mushrikina najasun. Which one is it? Najas or najis? There's discussion there. Okay? So you see, we have things to discuss there. If there are different qira'at, what do we do? And that's why you'll find some of the ulama today, when they say when you're reciting Surah Fatiha, okay, you don't have to necessarily say Sirat al-Mustaqim with a sad. You can say Sirat with a sin, because there's two different qira'at here. Interesting. These all have to be discussed in usul al-fiqh. So that I come up with a rule, a general rule, that says whenever there are two qira'at, this is what we'll do. Where do you come up with this rule? You discuss it where? Usul al-fiqh. Because it is one of those general rules you use for different parts of the sources that you are going to be deriving Islamic law from. The bindingness of dhuhur. This is a big one. It's discussed in usul al-fiqh. We talked about it. Can I act upon khabar wahid? Can I act upon khabar wahid? It's in usul al-fiqh, and so on and so forth. What if I know that the Quran is from Allah, which we all do? What if the understanding that I have of it is only dhuhur, it's not yaqini? What do I do there? What if I have a reliable hadith that is more specific than a general verse of the Quran? Can this hadith be a qualifier for that verse and restrict the scope of that verse? Let me give you an example. So we have in Surah, let me see here. In Surah Al-An'am, verse 145. قُلْ لَا أَجِدُ فِي مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ مُحَرَّمًا عَلَى طَاعِمٍ يَطْعَمُهُ. That it says, say, O Prophet, I don't find anything that's revealed to me that is haram, except that is haram on anyone who is consuming it, except إِلَّا أَن يَكُونَ مَيْتَةً, unless it's mayta, yeah, or daman, if it's blood, spilled blood, I think, daman masfuhan, أو لحم خنزير, if it's swine, pork, فإنه رجس أو فسقا أهل لغير الله به, or these animals that they would, slaughter for the idols in the wrong way, or things like that. He said, it's just 4 things. But then you have a hadith that comes and adds to this list. What do I do here? Which one takes precedence? The verse, and we keep its generalness and absoluteness, or do we go and take this hadith and say, no, this hadith is just narrowing the scope of this one was very general. It said only 4 things are haram, the rest is all halal on you. The rest is all halal on you. But then this hadith says, no, make this exception too, make this exception too, make this exception too. Can this happen? Does a hadith have the strength, so to speak, to affect a verse of the Quran? And so on. These are discussions. So brothers and sisters, a person might say, oh, just show me the hadith, I'll do my own, I'll see what the Imams have said. Yeah, what if I ask you 10 questions that you can't answer? Would you go ahead and practice medicine on yourself or a loved one when you have a diagnosis and you're not a physician necessarily, but you've studied a little bit, you're maybe what do they call them, this physician's assistant or something like that. You're an assistant, you're a nurse, you have an idea, you're like, if you have that feeling that you can, do this kind of work. What if someone presents to you 10 questions regarding your diagnosis? Are you going to still go ahead with it if you can't answer them? Or are you going to take some precaution here? Ijtihad is the same. These are all questions, brothers and sisters. These have to have been figured out somewhere for you as a person who wants to go to the sources. What are you going to do in a situation like this? All right, so can hadiths be qualifiers for the Quran? So these were specific examples for hadith, specific discussions for Quran, and then you'll have general ones. Brothers and sisters, the Quran says, Aqimus Salah, uphold prayer. This is a command, it's an amr they call it in Arabic. Does amr mean wajib? Did the Imam or the Quran say, it is wajib on you no matter what, and if you don't, you're going to be punished? Or did it say, aqimu? Guess what? We have a lot of mustahabbat that also have amr. A lot of mustahab, injunctions that we have, they also use amr. The Imam says, do this at this time of the night. Do this dhikr at this. That's a command, that's an amr. Okay? But it's mustahab. So what's your proof that amr is always wujub? Unless proven otherwise. We have to talk about that. Okay? Whether it's the Quran, whether it's the hadith. Okay? Sometimes the Imam will command, but that's not even mustahab, it's just mubah. So for example, someone comes to the Imam, he says, Imam, I'm not feeling well, One of my friends told me this once. I was sick, and when we were back in growing up, and so I wasn't getting better. I still remember, it was like one of those long ones. And it was like in the beginning of when I had gone, and so I wasn't too interested in getting injections. Now I'm cool with injections. But back then, those steroid injections, no. So I wasn't getting better. My friend was like, look, you have to have some proper lahm mishweh. You know what I'm saying? Some actual grilled meat, to strengthen yourself a little bit. You've gotten really weak. And then he told me this hadith. He's like, someone went to the Imam, and the Imam told him, and he said I'm not feeling well and all that kind of stuff. The Imam said, look, go have some meat. And so the guy goes and has some meat, doesn't get better, comes back to the Imam. He says, I had meat, I didn't get better. He said, how'd you eat it? He said, I boiled it. He said, no, grill it, baby. You grill that thing, all right? So the example I want to use here is this. The Imam said, go eat meat. It's not wajib on that person. It's not mustahab even necessarily. He's just giving him, some guidelines here so that he can go and get better. suggesting something to him. But amr is used. So when does amr mean wajib? When does it mean mustahab? When does it mean makruh? Excuse me, when does it mean mubah? These are discussions that I don't even think crosses someone's mind sometimes. All right, another question. Let's just say amr means wujub, wajib. Who says if I miss my salat now, I have to make it up? Does amr have that power? When it says aqimus salah, I want you to pray at this time every day. What if I miss that time of day and I don't pray? Who says I have to make it up? Does amr, if it means wujub, does it also mean qada if I miss? Or do I need a separate command for that? Discussed in usul al-fiqh again. These are very beautiful discussions, by the way. If they tell me something's wajib, does that mean once or several times? Which one is it? What's the default in all of these? Now that's amr. Nahi, when they forbid us, don't do this, does it mean haram? Well, what about makruh? Sometimes they're makruh. Same discussions you had in amr, you have in nahi. These are just examples. A person who's been to like Hawza, they know that what I'm going through right now, what list I'm going through right now. And then one of my favorites, the mafhum. When we talked about this, I gave this example a couple of weeks ago. When a certain sentence is said, and I'm sorry that I'm going into all these examples and details, I want us to have a good idea of what this usul al-fiqh is all about, that Ayatollah Khoury says is one of the conditions. Okay? When we have a sentence, when can I conclude that the opposite of that was also meant by the one who said that sentence? Example. The example I gave a few weeks ago. They tell me, hey, if so-and-so comes in, turn the lights on. Can I conclude from this sentence that I never have to turn the lights on unless so-and-so comes in? Or what can I come to this opposite conclusion or not? Question. In other words, if the person who told me, if so-and-so walks in, turn the lights on, and if that person who told me this comes in and sees the lights are still off, because that person hasn't come yet, can they hold me responsible and accountable and say, why didn't you turn it on? I'll say, you told me if that person comes, I turn it on. That means if that person doesn't come, I don't turn it on. I don't have to turn it on. Can someone conclude this? This is called mafhum al-shart. There's another thing called mafhum al-wasf. Baba says, Daddy says, go buy some camel meat. Does that mean that if I buy another type of meat, I'm in trouble or not? The fact that he said camel meat, does that show that he wants only camel meat? What if I come home with chicken meat or beef? Can he hold me accountable or not? This is a discussion. Mafhum al-ghaya. The Quran says, wash till your elbows. Okay, till your elbows, does that mean, are the elbows part of the washing or not? Okay, I'm washed till there. What about the rest? Mafhum al-adad. Do tasbihat al-arba'a 3 times in salat. Does that mean if I do more than 3, I'm in trouble? Does it break my salat? What if I do less than 3? These are all discussed, and some of them have to do with hermeneutics, for sure. Okay, and understanding text and literature. These are all discussed in usul al-fiqh. What else do we have? So, Ayatollah Shaykh al-Ansari, he said you either have 100% certainty or you have dhann. And then all these discussions come up. What if I don't even have dhann? I am in total shak. I have no idea. There's no hadith here, nothing. What do I do now? That's where another discussion comes up. And that itself is a big discussion. And these are called the al-usul al-amaliyah. All right. I don't have any idea, even 60% idea what I'm supposed to do because there's nothing. Remember, I gave the example of smoking. We don't have a hadith for smoking. There was no tobacco back then that they would smoke. Okay? We don't have hadith. I have total shak here. I have total shak. I don't know anything. No knowledge whatsoever, nothing. Here we have al-usul al-amaliyah. There are rules that Islam has given us in different situations. 4 of them. Sometimes you have asalatul bara'ah. Everything's halal until proven otherwise. But then you have something else, asalatul ihtiyat. You have to do ihtiyat in certain cases. Each of these have their own mawdu'. Each of these have their own case where they apply to. That's number 2, asalatul ihtiyat. Number 3, asalatul takhir. Choose whichever one you want. Choose whichever one you want. Okay? Let's say I'm going somewhere, I'm stuck. I have to go forward. There's a door here and a door here. What do? You got to pick a door at the end of the day. All right? That's an example in real life situations. In fiqh, you'll have the same thing. Takhir, choose one. There's not that we can't give precedence or preference to each of these. Just take one and go with it. Asalatul takhir. And then there's another one called istishab. That one is a specific case. It's a little different than the other 3 that we talked about. Once again, these are technical things we'll get to later, inshallah. We won't spend too much time on. I'm just giving you these examples now so we have an idea. We're scratching that surface. And then you have the whole discussion of aql and ijma', which is its own thing. I don't want to even get into, all right? So look, you have yaqeen, you have dhann, you have shak. All of these will have their own rules, all of which are discussed in usul al-fiqh. So that's usul al-fiqh. That's one of the conditions. And finally, let me go through this real quick. We don't have too much time. Finally, the last one Ayatul Al-Khuyi points out is rijal. Ilmur rijal, which for some people is the worst thing ever. And for some people, they enjoy it a lot. It's one of those, for me personally, I despised it in the past. Now I really like it. Okay? I find it very actually sweet. Okay, so this ilmur rijal. Ayatul Al-Khuyi, he says, look, most rulings, whether we like it or not, they come from the hadiths, not the Quran. And if the Quran has verses on certain rules and rulings, they're going to be very general ones. Just like the one I read to you right now. The Prophet is told to tell the people, look, there's only 4 or 5 things that I find that are haram in my list of foods. But then the Imams come up with a lot more. And even the Prophet might have hadiths that adds to that. Okay? So here, he says, if we're going to the hadiths, it's not like the Quran where we're sure it comes from Allah. As we all know, the hadiths, both in the Sunni school and the Shi'i school, the hadith corpus of the Sunnis and the Shias, they all suffer from the same problems. Okay? You can never be 100% sure that they have been uttered. Unless you have a mutawatir hadith. One of those hadith that has been narrated so much by so many people, different, that you become 100% sure, okay, this one the Prophet has said. But they're very small in number, these ones. Okay? Alright, so what we're dealing with is usually hadith we're not 100% sure about that have been said and uttered. Okay, he says here, the best we can do is to go to the narrators of those hadiths and see what's going on with them. There's 2 major schools of thought here. There are some who say, look man, we're relaxed when it comes to the chain of narrators. We don't even look at the chain of narrators as long as these narrations and hadiths are in one of those important books of ours, like those 4 main books that I said, or some of the other ones. And the ulama have used these hadiths throughout the ages, and they haven't turned away from it, despite it being in those 4 major books and other major works. We will go with this, and we will consider it credible. Right? We're cool with it. We don't need to look at who is the one that's transmitting this hadith. Ayatul Al-Khuyi says, if you're one of those people, you don't really need to know rijal actually too much. You have to know the hadith books a little bit and all of that. That should be it. Once you look into the fiqh books, you'll see which ulama have, which hadiths they've used and so on. And you're good, you're set. Now, I want to open a parenthesis here. Some of these people who say, oh, we don't need to do taqlid or ijtihad and all that kind of stuff, they'll say, look, just show me the hadith. It's in one of these 4 books. I'm good. I'm set. No. Brothers and sisters, these people don't fall into this category. Remember, we went through a whole list of other conditions. Arabic, grammar, sarf, nah, all these. Usulul fiqh, you have to have figured those things out at the end of the day. All those questions I asked, you have to have an answer to them. Then you can say, okay, I'm not a rijali, I'm not interested. I'm a wuthuqi. That's what they call them. You have wuthuq. You're sure that this hadith was said because it's in one of these books. Alright, so you can at least approach it with all those other tools in usul al-fiqh that you had. The ones who are anti, they will, at least my understanding is, they'll say, look, yeah, we'll just go by these hadiths that are in here. Okay, but do you have the usul al-fiqh for it or not? So don't say that, oh, I'm in this camp. No, this camp has big alims too, very big scholars, and they know how to do it. If you're one of them, then alhamdulillah. If not, then no. And finally, so he says that's one school of thought, but he says, I'm not from that school of thought. Ayatul Al-Khuyi says, I'm not from that school of thought. Ayatul Al-Khuyi is known for being very strict when it comes to rijal. He says, I have to be sure And I have my reasons for it, and all of this is discussed in his Rijal and his Usul al-Fiqh. He says, look, for me, I have to be sure that each of these people is reliable, is thiqah. Not muwathaq or mawthuq, mawthuqun bih. Thiqah. I'm not looking for a mawthuq hadith that I'm sure because it's one of those books. No, I want to make sure the chain is sound. For me, because of this, I have no choice but to go and learn Rijal. And he has that huge work called Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith. Ayatollah Khoui has volumes upon volumes. I forget how many volumes it is. It's like maybe 30, 40 volumes. I don't know how many. I don't remember. It's a ton of work that he's done. One by one, he's gone and found each of these narrators where their hadiths are in all of these 4 books and more and more. So that is itself a science. And so he says, look, if you're going to be from this school of thought, this is also one of those requirements. So we have 3 or 4 requirements. 3, I would say. Arabic with all of its branches. Then you have Usul al-Fiqh and you have Rijal. End of story. So it's not like 10, 15 like some have listed. But these 2 or 3, hey, it takes a lifetime to learn them. A lifetime to teach them as these maraji' have. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Any questions before we end? Yes. That's a Quranic sciences thing. The brother is asking about Ayatul Khoui and his opinion on the 7 harfs, right? That the Quran has been revealed. Al-Ahruf al-Sab'a and all that. Yeah, that's a Quranic sciences discussion, and it will make its way into Usul al-Fiqh as well in the Quran part to an extent, I would say. But yeah, we don't have time to get into that right now. Plus, I'm not ready for that. That's a big one that requires a lot of work. Anything else? All right. Well, alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Salawat. Tonight was long. Sorry. I thought tonight was going to be the shortest one, actually. متوجه زيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ولد الحسين. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء ومعين الضعفاء والفقراء أيها الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان. الأمان الأمان من فتن الزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.